Today, I want to start by asking who first comes to mind when you think of leadership? Maybe it's your mom. Maybe it's Barack Obama. Maybe it's Michael Jordan. Or maybe it's Peter Quill. Well, what do all these people have in common? Well, they all have this ability to motivate or to influence others, people other than themselves. John Maxwell, leadership guru, if you will, says that leadership is influence. It's the ability to influence others. And influence, when we look at people, when we look at leaders, particularly for influence, we're looking at people who are maybe they're physically strong. Think of how the Israelites thought of Saul, or maybe we're thinking of people who have authority, maybe like Queen Elizabeth herself, or maybe it's people with a specific kind of charisma, and they just get you. Think of Vince, the slap chop guy, or something like that. There's these different traits that we look at in their ability to influence. Well, the problem with leadership based solely on these qualities is that it can very easily lead to abuse. It can lead to greed. It can lead to broken trust. And so today, as we continue our series on renewal, we need to be asking, what is Jesus looking for in leadership? And we're reminded, the past series we talked about the priesthood and all these different things, but we're reminded through the Word of God that leadership really is intended for everyone. We're reminded of the very first commandment, and that is go forth and multiply. We read this in the beginning of Genesis. And so all of humanity, as made in God's image, is to have influence, is to steward. And the problem is, we don't really look at leadership that way. Some of us are saying, oh, I'm not a leader. Nobody listens to me. Or I'm not a boss or a manager. So we confuse leadership with, having authority over others, if you will. Well, to illustrate this, we all have influence. And we can either influence people to Jesus, or we can lead people away from Jesus. Just to illustrate this, of how much influence we have over others, how many of you interact with other people? Maybe you have a job, and in your job you talk with people, and that's a regular part of your engagement. But maybe you do paperwork, you do all these things, and it affects other people. Or maybe you commute. Really, what I'm saying is, if you engage other people, you have the opportunity, or you are influencing them in some way. So, the other week, my family and I were driving. We're driving just to downtown, and we were at a red light, and we go. And I'm going along, like me and the car beside me. We're going the same speed. I think we're moving along. My wife and I were having a good conversation, and all of a sudden, this guy honks at me, and it was a really tiny honk. And I was like, "Is that for me? I don't see anybody else." Anyway, so I didn't really think of it. And this guy pulls up beside me, and he gives me the bird. Not this bird, but a different bird. And I was like, what's going on? So I wish I could tell you that I really demonstrated Christ-like leadership. And, I kept my cool, and I, shared the gospel with this person. But in actuality, I didn't. I I tried to get this guy's attention, and I pulled up beside him. I'm like, "Hey, what's going on?" So my first volley was good. It was, "Hey, can I help you? What's the matter? Is there something wrong with your vehicle?" And this guy just like, "Learn how to drive," in other words. And he starts talking, and this guy, he starts getting mad at me. He's like, "Drive the speed limit." And to my knowledge of driving as fast as everybody else, and he doesn't look in a particular hurry. In fact, the guy is on a moped, and he's not even going very fast. And I just got so annoyed. My kids are with me, and I'm just like, "What's your problem?" And all these different things. And my point is, even in driving, you have influence over people. I got so riled up. I actually had to turn around after, and I apologized to my kids. I said, "Kids, whatever I just did there, don't do that. I apologize. You forgive me. I need to be more composed and more honoring." But all these different things is my point again is what we do has an influence on other people. So we all have influence. We all have leadership opportunities, even in the day-to-day of life. So Christ-centered leadership is influence which directs people to Jesus. If you have your Bibles with you, I'd like you to turn them to the book of John, chapter 21, verses 15 to 19. And that's our text from today, for today. And so we're going to be reading that. This is the English Standard Version. So starting in verse 15, we read, "When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?' He said to him, Peter said, 'Yes, Lord, you know that I love you.' So Jesus said to him, 'Feed my lambs.' He said to him a second time, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me?' And John says to him, 'Yes, Lord, you know that I love you.' He said to him this time, 'Tend my sheep.' He said to him a third time, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me?' And at this, Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, 'Do you love me?' And he said to him, 'Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you.' And Jesus said to him, 'Feed my sheep. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go.' This he said to show him by what kind of death he was to glorify God. And after saying this, he said to him, 'Follow me.'" Last week, we follow up on this "follow me" from Jesus calling disciple makers you. And today we want to know how. And from our text, there are three keys to leadership we want to remember from our text, and that is we want to feed, not fix. We want to establish growth, and we need to know that emotions connect. In our first thing here, we read that feed, not fix. Remember the context of this passage. If you read the Passion Translation, the heading for this particular passage actually says, Jesus restores Peter. So who was Peter? Well, Peter was a fisherman. We learned that last week. And we learned that he was the rock. Jesus called him and said, "I will build my church on this fisherman." Peter was someone who walked on water. He was someone who had this tremendous zeal for Jesus and was one of the closest disciples. And yet we also read in the Bible that Peter denied Jesus not once, not twice, but 3 times. He denied him, said he didn't know him. Even after all the experiences they had, even after all the declarations Peter had made, even after seeing and knowing that Jesus was the Christ. And yet, Peter denied him. And here, John, in this final chapter, focuses on this final address from Jesus to John. And so I want us to really look at what Jesus is saying here. So what is he emphasizing? Well, first, Jesus emphasizes feed. Now, depending on what version you're reading, I read the English Standard Version. It said, feed my lambs, and then it said, tend my sheep, and then feed my sheep. If you're reading the King James Version, it actually says feed 3 times. But the feed there between the 15 and 17, so the bookmarks, that's the same feed. And this is to feed in a spiritual manner. Think of a Christian teacher promoting ways in which the members of the church or the body of Christ can be built up through nourishment, spiritual nourishment. The middle feed there, and in some versions, in mine, in the English Standard, again, it says tend. And this one is a little bit different. It's to feed, yes, but it's to keep them in a sense to, this is used in the Greek to rule, to govern, to watch over, to oversee. And so we get two commandments from Jesus here that, Peter, if you love me, feed my church, feed my people, feed my lambs, feed my sheep, build them up. And so what we want to ask here is, the emphasis is feed, but notice the emphasis is not fix. How many of us in our leadership, when the first thing we do when we walk into a room, whether this is at work, whether this is in the kitchen, whether this is at home, anywhere, and we notice all the things that are wrong with the setting, but more particularly wrong with people. Why is it like this? Why did they do that? How did they do that? What were they thinking? And we tend to think in these ways because we're thinking of how this affects us. How does this affect my life? And so our first thought is, how do I fix this? I need to fix this. I need to, in a way, fix others. And again, here, the focus is on us. So feeding here is to encourage good health. Fixing, on the other hand, is to first determine the problem. And so today, as we're talking about renewal, are you someone who is always finding something wrong in the world? I want to remind you, our calling is not to fix people. It's not even to transform people, because only God can do that, and only God does that. What our calling is to provide a healthy environment with nourishment and boundaries. That is, Christ-centered leadership should be asking, how can I serve you? When we're talking about people and we're discerning, am I someone who's leading as Christ intended? Are you asking, how can I serve this person? Instead of, what is wrong with you? We live in a world today that is tired, it's broken, it's fragmented, and it's divided. And it's so easy to find what's wrong with people. And if we look at the first example of sin in Genesis, this comes from our desire to control our own circumstances and, in essence, others around us. And so we take of the fruit. We want to be like God. We want to know things instead of having just this joy to go and do and serve and steward. And so part of our own thing in this is we want to know what's wrong with people, and we do. Knowing what's wrong with the world today is a lonely place. It's a difficult journey. And it's a burdensome road. Here, Christ-centered leadership is for your benefit as well. To feed others, to give life, and to direct people to the one who gives life. Will you ask, how can I serve others today? The second thing that we see from our text here is that we need to establish growth. Look at the differences here between a lamb and a sheep. I gotta confess, I don't know much about animals. I actually had to look up, what is the difference between a lamb and a sheep? Like, for all I know, this is a different animal, just being really honest with you. Well, the difference between a lamb and a sheep is age. A lamb is a young, usually younger, that like an infant or a toddler. I'm not sure if these are the right words, but you know what I mean. A small sheep, and a sheep is an older one. So the difference here is physical growth. So we see here, yes, feed my sheep and feed my lambs, and emphasis here is that growth is happening. Leadership that is Christ centered should build people up and release them, not build and maintain, or not build and collect. See, leadership, all of us know influence can make us feel good, it can make us feel important. And what we have to watch for is when we desire it for ourselves, and when we build our leadership, and again, leadership has to involve others. When we do it just for ourselves, this is greed. I want to draw your attention to the book of Matthew, chapter 23, starting in verse 8. Jesus is here speaking to the Pharisees, and he says to them, "But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all brothers. And call no man your father on the earth, for you have one Father who is in heaven. Neither be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Christ. The greatest among you shall be your servant. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted." Here, we have this really challenging passage, because if you really think about it, it actually does challenge the way we've been doing church. Jesus is really clear here. Don't call anyone father. Don't call anyone teacher. Why? Because you're all brothers. You're all intended to be co-heirs with Christ, in a sense. Like we are all equals. Equals, and I got to be really careful here. This is not to say that there is no positions for really defined pastoral leadership or teachers in the church. There are those giftings. But we want to be careful here is when we're using these titles to divide people, to segregate, but more so, even beyond that, to say who is called and who isn't. It can lead to a really dangerous place where there are only people in the church who have a relationship to God. And we've debunked that through Scripture, and we've gone through this. So how do we do that going forward? How are we reminded that Christ is the head of the church, and we are given to one another to build up the body, to help us grow, that we may excel and be demonstrators of the person of Jesus and his Spirit in the world. And our goal is to establish growth among the people around us so that they can be a part of God's body and not our own. You see, Christ-centered leadership asks, how can I release you for God's kingdom, not my own? And so, again, we do need boundaries. We do need teaching. We do need feeding. But the goal here, just like any parent, my goal is never to feed my child, and as much as I would love it, for them to stay home with me forever. The goal is for me is to release them, to be their own person who Christ has called them to be, not who I think they should be. And so my role as a parent, as a teacher, as a father to my kids, is to build them up so eventually they don't need me. But how many times, you know what I mean by need, by the way, but how many times do we, I think particularly in Eastern context, where our kids, we hold on to them, and we develop this unhealthy dependence where, we are looking at a generation that lacks confidence to strike it out on their own. And again, not in a bad way. There needs to be balance here. but in a way where, there are should be markers of individual maturity, and yet we would rather them be completely dependent on us as providers. Christ-centered leadership needs to establish growth. It's for God's kingdom. It's not for myself. A third thing that we need to be reminded of that is that emotions connect. You see, there's this fallacy that leaders should have everything figured out. And, some of us, we all know a leader, whether that's a boss, whether that's a church leader, or whether that's someone in our family who just, they know it all, they have it all together. And they're always quick to point out and to teach and to say, hey, this is how we can do things better. And there's nothing wrong with that. But as Michael Scott once said, sometimes you have to take a break from being the kind of boss that is always trying to teach people things. Sometimes you just have to be the boss of dancing. So what does this mean? Well, in this world that we're in, of course, we're going to trust people who have proven competency and experience. And, when we go to, for instance, not that I've done this, but let's say you're going to bungee jump or something like that. Your only point of contact is, you're going to study up and do all these things. So you're going to trust people's competency. How many times have they done this? Have people survived? What's the success rate? All those things. But more than people trusting you because of your competency, people will be motivated by you because of your sincerity, because of your genuineness, because of your realness. You see, we've put leaders on this pedestal where they have it all figured out and they're straight-faced and they're strong all the time. And we inadvertently sometimes, or maybe intentionally, we avoid emotions. Here, how does Jesus motivate and encourage Peter? He simply asks him 3 questions. And remember, this is after everything that had happened. He just asked, do you love me? You see, we need to be real because that is what people can relate to. This, do you love me? Modern leadership, we kind of avoid this. And even as we're talking about the needs for transparency, we look at all the government apologies. We look at how we have related to the First Nations people. We look at things like Black Lives Matter. We look at Stop Asian Hate, all these things. And so many times we're so quick now to apologize. And yet we ask, is it genuine or is it required? And I would think today in 2021, people just know you gotta be quick. When something happens, you just gotta apologize. But is that genuine? Does it connect with people? And so I want to encourage you even to take this step further as we're thinking about being genuine in our leadership and thinking about the broken world that we are called to minister into and to see renewal and restoration. I want to ask you if you would be willing to take another step further and ask the simple question. When dealing with things that are difficult to talk about, but need to be dealt with, can you demonstrate leadership and ownership by asking for forgiveness? You see, it is how we feel that people will connect with us. Not everyone can be strong. Not everyone can have a built-in authority. Not everyone is charismatic. But all of us can be genuine. All of us have made mistakes. All of us, like Peter, have denied Christ in our own way. And yet Jesus calls us and invites us. He invites us to emotionally connect with him and to risk being vulnerable so that people would know Jesus more. And so Christ-centered leadership asks, will I take risks for others to understand and know the gospel of Jesus? And will I take these risks over them liking me? People will trust us through our competency and experiences, but they'll be motivated through our shared failures. As we close here, our leadership demonstrates our love for Jesus. See, anyone can serve others when it is advantageous to them. This isn't really that hard. This is actually just being possibly, in most cases, manipulative. It's not leadership. People can uplift others when their resources allow for it. And there's nothing wrong with that. This is good. But this is really just being a decent human being. It's not leadership. Serving others when it's not only is it not convenient to you, but more so inconvenient to you, where sacrifice is required for the benefit of others. This is leadership. This is Christ-centered leadership. This is the leadership Christ demonstrated when he humbled himself into human form and ultimately offered himself up to death on the cross. And though he committed no crime, he inconvenienced himself so that humanity can once again be connected with God. I'm going to read this last text here. Starting in verse 18, 19. Truly, truly, Jesus says to Peter, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go. And this was shown to Peter so that he would know by what kind of death he was to glorify God. And it is after this connection of, yes, you've made mistakes. Yes, you've denied me, but I still call you. I still invite you. Do you love me? Will you follow me? And will you die as I have died for you? This is the question for us as leaders. The good news is that you don't have to be the stereotypical charismatic yeller and screamer. You don't have to go to leadership school, or you don't have to get an MBA. You just have to care. You have to care about Jesus, and you have to care about people. In 1 Timothy 3, we have two types of leaders in the church, and these are overseers or elders, and these are deacons. I'm not going to read it, but you'll notice they have the same criteria. But I want us to notice a difference here, where as an elder is an overseer, yes, it makes decisions and directions. A deacon, the word here is used throughout the New Testament to minister, to serve. When we say the word here for deacon, literally means a servant, the office of servanthood. And so what does it take to be a Christ-centered leader? It takes servanthood. And will Supper Club model servanthood? You see, there is a cost to Christ-centered leadership. If you've figured out this acronym of feed, not fix, establish growth, and emotions connect, Christ-centered leadership has a cost. It's not free. There's a fee, if you will. And to be clear, this is not a message encouraging you to go out to be a martyr, but rather ask yourself, in what ways are you willing to sacrifice? In what ways are you willing to be inconvenienced so that others can be directed to Jesus? How can you demonstrate Christ-centered leadership today? Doing this leads to renewal. A renewal of our communities, of our homes, of our families, of our country, of our world. You see, at the heart of renewal, more than health, more than harmony, more than healing, is simply this. The heart of renewal is our pursuit of Jesus. Will you follow him? The cost of following Jesus has to be leadership. It has to be with how you lead others. Our leadership demonstrates our love for Jesus. Will you follow Jesus today?